Hello and welcome to this International Education Partnership CPD video on differentiation. Before we get started, you will need to pop over to the class stream and download the handouts for this session if you haven't already done so. So pause the video now and pop over to the stream to download them. So the aim for this video is that all viewers will understand the importance of differentiated instruction, that most viewers by the end of the video will identify what strategies they're already using, and that some of you will also develop and investigate strategies to level up your differentiation. And this is the first differentiation strategy today, simply acknowledging that not everyone in the room is going to end up at the same place at the end of the lesson. Perhaps you might word this differently depending on the age and stage of your students or on your school's policy, but it boils down to the same thing. The first step in differentiated instruction is to acknowledge the differences of your learners. Assessment is at the heart of successful differentiation. I've got a little table here that's been taken from the performance management grid to help you to self-assess your starting point today. So read through the descriptions and choose the tier which best describe you on an average day. Make a note of where you are at the moment, but bear in mind that as humans, we don't tend to fit neatly in one box, and nor do we stay there. So for example, on an average day, I would put myself in tier 2. I differentiate tasks mainly by outcome or expected quantity of work. However, even on an average day, I habitually use a range of low preparation differentiation strategies, which comes from tier 4, and on a good day, my profile might be more accurately described by tier 3. And this is your second differentiation strategy. Bit more preparation required. Using the tiers, you will self-assign tasks, but bear in mind you can always backpedal or level up your task as required. And you can use this with the students as well. So kids today live in a world of personalisation where they choose when to watch their favourite TV show. They pick the individual song that they want to download rather than buying an album, and they get news on demand whenever they need it. So not only do our learners come from an increasingly diverse group, but outside of school they also live in this world of personalisation. So the logic behind differentiation is that our students differ as learners and they need to challenge success and learning experiences that are appropriate to them. And we can't achieve this instructional fit for each learner by ignoring their differences. So attending to the student differences needs this flexible approach to teaching, which is really the basis of differentiation. And differentiation centres around assessment. As teachers, we subconsciously assess all the time. Have a look at this image. This is a still from a teaching video on YouTube. Just take a moment to listen to what your teacher brain is telling you about these kids. And that's the first step in differentiating, listening to that teacher brain and adapting to the room. So from my perspective, I'm seeing this little girl at the back in the stripes, desperate to speak, and the little boy beside her sound asleep, not even paying attention. So for me, I would be saying to her, why don't you tell little Jimmy beside you what it is that you want to say and ask him for his idea. And that would re-engage him. Oh, I'm meant to be doing something. And it would validate her, she's being allowed to speak and say what she wants to say. And this is a really basic differentiation strategy, which I imagine most people are already using in their classroom in almost every lesson. So there are 4 fundamental ways to differentiate. First one is content. So this is quite a high preparation area. This is things like providing reading materials at a range of different levels. It might be focus group teaching or the specific provision for students with additional support needs. Process, this is a quite a high preparation area as well, ranging from providing some manipulatives all the way up to the tiered activities that we've mentioned before. Product, This is a lower prep area, so this is differentiated expectations of quality and quantity of work, or it might be giving students options of different ways to express their learning. It might be a labelled diagram, an essay, an interpretive dance, whatever. You'll notice that these two sections are in bold italics: the process, the activities the students will engage in, and the products, the work that they're going to produce. This might mean that some students are doing something totally different, working on a totally different piece of work in the same lesson. So a nice example of differentiated product, with a Year 6 class, I was teaching an end of topic lesson on rivers and the use of river water for irrigation, and we had a nice group and ungroup and regroup activity where we had each child in the group had a shape assigned to them. So we had a circle, a triangle, a square and a rectangle in each group. Each of them had a different focus. They then went away from the group and all the circles got together and shared what they knew, and then they came back to their original groups, shared what they'd learned, shared all the different information that they'd gathered, and then made a decision about what area of the uses of river water that they wanted to present on. And the instruction was, present however you want. You can make a poster, you could do a dance, you can do a little play, whatever you want. So the interpretive dance was thrown in there as a kind of a joke, but in the end I had a group who did the most beautiful and graceful interpretive dance on the use of river water for irrigation, with a lot of wiggly movements signifying the water travelling down the river and travelling through the pipes, lots of nice spinning and twirling hand movements to signify the water being spread over the fields and the sprinklers, all the way to the end where I had one student standing up straight with their arms above their head and their hands outreached to the sun like the leaves of a plant. And I looked down on the floor and one girl was curled up in a ball underneath this beautiful plant child, curled up in a ball on the floor. And I said, "Sophia, what are you doing?" And she popped up and said, "I'm a potato." Anyway, that's an example of a differentiated product. That group were working on an interpretive dance to express what they'd learned. There was another group who created a large poster with all the information that they'd gathered, so they were expressing their learning in a written form. Another group created a short play or a sketch where they acted out different parts of the uses of river water. So although the objective was the same at the beginning of the lesson, all the students worked in their own ways that suited them to produce different end products at the end of the lesson. The final area for differentiation is the learning environment, so your classroom and how it's organised. And this can be quite a nice way to differentiate, because it can be something you set up at the beginning of the year when you teach classroom routines and set up zones in your room, and those can actually support your differentiation strategies. So, a little task for you now, a tiered task. If you levelled yourself earlier as Tier 1, you are going to take note of 3 differentiation strategies from either this video or from the handout that you want to try this term. If you are Tier 2, you're going to make a note of the positive points of the 3 main strategies that you use regularly, so you're assessing your own strategies. If you're from Tier 3, you're going to compare your 3 main strategies and identify which one's the most successful across a variety of year groups or subjects. And if you're Tier 4 up in the top end there, you're going to identify your most valuable differentiation strategies. These are the ones that provide the highest yield, regardless of how much preparation is involved. And then pause the video now and have a little think about that and make some notes. So moving on to assessment. As I said before, assessment is the centre of differentiation. You can prepare different areas of the lesson all you want, but successful differentiation will always come back to assessment. You need to know where your students are, you need to be checking their progress before you can get them to where they need to be. So the quickest way of doing this is by encouraging students to self or peer assess. using some of these strategies. But bear in mind, when you are using these strategies, that student confidence plays a part in their self-assessment. So it might lead an underconfident student to underestimate themselves and end up working on a task that's too easy for them and therefore not progressing. Or it might conversely lead an overly confident student to overestimate themselves and get themselves stuck on a task that's too difficult for them and therefore also not progressing. So your own teacher assessment is vital to support these progress checks and to ensure that all the students end up in that Goldilocks zone where learning occurs. Just to make sure that you're all familiar with these progress check strategies, we've got show of hands, which would be hands up if you understand what you're doing, hands up if you're stuck, that kind of thing. The next one is thumbs, which is similar to hands up but a little less overt. So the students would thumbs up if they understand what they're doing, thumbs in the middle if they're not sure they need a bit of help, and thumbs down if they're really, really stuck. I would use that one a lot particularly with my younger students when I was teaching year 2. I would get them to self-assess after I'd done the teaching input in the lesson, and then I would take all the thumbs down people and reteach while the thumbs in the middle and thumbs up people started the task. And once I'd retaught to the thumbs down people, I would then go and check on the thumbs in the middle people to make sure that they were all right, and then circulate around the thumbs up people to check on them as well. Fist to 5 is another similar strategy to thumbs, although it's giving you more of a scale. So they're starting from 0, which would be the fist, and showing you the number of fingers to show you where they're at, up to 5. Next we've got traffic lights. That's another one that you can use possibly after a task in their books to draw the coloured circle representing the traffic lights, how they felt about a piece of work. Rubrics are useful to compare the students' progress to the teacher's expectations, more useful for older students. And move and discuss is another one that's really useful for older students. When they've had a new topic introduced to them, they have a discussion with the person beside them, and then after a set amount of time, they're instructed to stand up, move to the other side of the room and talk to someone else. So then they're re-explaining themselves and they're being asked different questions by a different person to help to solidify their ideas. So these progress checks will then lead you into your planned strategies, your planned differentiation strategies. For the next section, you're going to need the Bloom's taxonomy handout. So if you haven't downloaded that already, pause the video now and pop over to the class stream to download it. So the easiest and lowest prep way into differentiation is through the use of questioning. And Bloom's taxonomy really neatly levels questions for us, but it can be difficult to apply this. So here's a sequence of up-leveled questions on differentiation, which I made using the question stems at the bottom of your handout. They're really handy. I've always found Bloom's taxonomy quite difficult to apply, but those question stems are really useful. So, first question at the knowledge level is, what is differentiation? Upping the level of thought required a little bit more to the comprehension level, what's the main idea of differentiation? What examples can you share? What are the features of a well-differentiated lesson? How would you design standard differentiation techniques you can use in every class? Can you assess the value of a particular strategy based on your students? So the idea here is that as the complexity of the question increases, the complexity of thought required for an answer also increases. So for example, writing the questions, I was able to write the knowledge, comprehension and application questions quite quickly, but when it came to writing an analysis, synthesis and evaluation questions, the actual writing of the questions took a bit more thought on how to word them in order to get an answer that would make sense. So if I'm having to think more to write the questions, the students are definitely having to think more in order to be able to answer them. The use of this, if you've got a set of questions like this prepared for your lesson, is you can use these to bounce questions around the room and use techniques like question, pause, nominate, ask a knowledge level question, wait for an answer, and once you've got an answer, bounce the question back out, but up-level it to the comprehension question. And then again, nominate someone else to answer the application question, so you're constantly challenging the thought at every level there. So, a little task for you to do now is use the question stems at the bottom of that Bloom's handout and create a series of up-level questions on your own topic of choice. Anything you want. It can be something to do with the subject or a topic that you're teaching, or it can be about your favourite soap opera, whatever. Spend a few minutes doing that, pause the video to give yourself time to have a think about it. Okay, so now that you've got your questions, that probably took quite a little while, particularly, as I said, when you get up to the analysis level and further up the taxonomy. So the idea here is that if you get into the habit of thinking this way about your questions, it will become second nature to up-level your questioning when you see the need to challenge your students' thinking. So once you get used to this, it becomes lower preparation. You don't have to sit and think about the questions so much. You're in the habit of up-leveling your questioning, and it just happens naturally. So here's a question that you're all thinking now. Well, what do you want us to do? We've established that you're aware of the differences in your students and that you're already responding to these differences, and that you already have some strategies in place to manage their differing ability and the differing engagement levels of the students, which is great. This is the first step towards effective differentiation. So what comes next is thinking proactively about differentiation at the planning stage and embedding differentiation in your lesson plans. This doesn't have to mean starting from scratch and planning everything over again. It can if you want to, but it's a case of looking at your lesson plans and thinking about how you can differentiate the objectives, how you can add resources that would be useful to help support students at different levels. The next thing is using progress checks and being very mindful of that subconscious teacher brain. Let your kids assess themselves, let them assess each other, and use this information to direct your differentiation. And try things out. If one strategy doesn't work with one particular group, ditch it and try something else. There's no shame in being flexible. It's very helpful for differentiation to be able to be flexible and try out lots of different strategies. And let the students take control of their learning, give them choices, allow them to choose how they take in information, how they make sense of it, and how to express what they're learning. But don't try to use high preparation differentiation strategies in every single lesson. It's not sustainable. Find your differentiation sweet spot and then work to level it up. So how do we go about doing this? You're going to start with the objective. So is every student realistically going to achieve your objective by the end of the lesson? Have some students reached it already? What's the next step? How will the students level up their learning? So if you differentiate your objective at the planning stage, this sets your intention for the rest of the lesson. Choose your words. Plan how you're going to word explanations to develop the vocabulary of your more able students and still support everyone's understanding. Think about questioning. Use the Bloom's taxonomy to plan levelled questions and identify which groups or which students that those questions are aimed at. Think about the task. What is it that the students are going to actually do in the lesson? Are they all going to be able to participate? How can you scaffold the task for students who will need help? And what can you do to challenge more able students? And finally, be prepared. Think about materials and resources that you're going to use in your lesson. Think about how you can adapt these to support and extend learning. And think if there are any resources you could have on hand that would help. So these are tiered, using the tiers that we mentioned earlier on again. This is your homework. You're going to start out with a prepared lesson plan or a scheme of work or an objective for a new lesson. You're going to plan in differentiation based on your tier. And remember, you can always backpedal or level up. So everybody is going to do the tier 1 planning differentiation and at the objective stage. If you're at tier 2, you're also going to think about your words, your vocabulary and the Bloom's taxonomy questions. If you're at tier 3, you're also going to think about the task and how you can scaffold or challenge your students in the task that you set for them. And if you're in Tier 4, you're going to think about the resources that you're preparing to use in your lessons and the materials that you're using. So to summarise, the main thing here is to remember that you are already differentiating, and all we want you to do is level up what you're already doing. You do not have to go all out for every lesson. So I will leave you there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll let you go and do your homework now. Have fun.